for your very active collaboration with us in the whole Made in Nigeria policy implementation. And I think that this particular exercise is one that clearly demonstrates the kind of participation that we expect from the private sector in implementing some of the ideas that, in many cases, ideas that are not just government ideas or the ideas of government, but ideas that we thought through together at some point or the other. I attended several events, either hosted by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria or some of the other organized private sector groups. And this whole Made in Nigeria issue was one that came up several times, and one that really, as you know, is not therefore original. It's not a concept that came out of the executive orders. The whole point of the executive orders was to set the ball rolling, to create the environment for this sort of initiatives. And I'm really pleased and extremely grateful to you for the work that you've done in bringing this to the fore. Just listening to the issues that you've raised, I think that these are all very, very important, and I believe that they are practical, and they are they're also very possible. I don't think there's any, they're entirely doable. I don't think there's any one of the suggestions you've made in terms of policy that is outrageous or difficult to implement in any way. As a matter of fact, I think that we will go ahead and do most of what has been suggested. The margin of preference, setting a margin of preference for Made in Nigeria goods. First, I was a bit, it's an expression I'm not particularly familiar with, and I'm sure it comes from the rich resources of the Dr. Jacobs and co, because it's an expression for some reason I have not come across at all, but I think it does describe what we're trying to achieve, namely that we should say that in certain sectors we'll be insisting that government purchases should meet a certain threshold. I think in this particular case, the 35% threshold that you propose is entirely reasonable, and we should be able to do better than that in terms of driving government procurement, if I understand you correctly.
Can I explain?
Please go.
All right. Actually, the margins of preference refers to, there are a lot of challenges the manufacturing sector has, and therefore our cost of production is unusually high compared to what is obtainable globally.
Yes.
So what we're saying that if a particular item is imported, can be imported at 100 naira.
Yeah.
Now, a Nigerian produces the same item and wants to sell it at 135 naira.
Yes.
Government should patronize Nigeria,
yes,
and not the.
Yes.
So that's what we mean by 35% margin.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, what you're saying is that the difference, the price differential should be in the order of about 35%. Okay. That makes. Isn't that interesting? This is the problem. Doc, I think it would just be a bit simpler for those of us who need to catch up on these concepts and all of that. I think it would help a great deal. Because what I actually thought you meant was something, was more setting a threshold for government purchases and all of that. But I think that that's something we can certainly take a look at. One thing, though, is that we always expect that Made in Nigeria products will almost invariably be slightly more expensive anyway. Question, is how much more expensive. But again, a deliberate policy of purchasing Made in Nigeria takes that into account. It's just that, I think it's a good thing that we set some kind of a percentage, which I think is very helpful. So we'll look at all of this. We'll look at all of this. I'll sit with our procurement people as well, sit with the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. Fortunately, the Honourable Minister is here. We'll look at it and try and set it into policy and all that. But I think it makes plenty of sense. As a matter of fact, the point you've made is really the reason why we thought that an executive order might be required. That if and especially with respect to textiles and, armed forces and, the non-armed forces, uniforms of armed forces and non-armed forces and all of that. And we think that this is entirely doable. We think it's the right thing to do. There's no reason at all why we cannot patronize local textiles and local tailors, even if we are not able to get the textiles immediately. But also, there's also a very good, fairly large market now of those who are, a fairly large number of those who are producing boots and shoes and things like that for the military. Some of the forces have actually ordered local booths and things, and we're trying to ensure that becomes that becomes the norm. Yes, so hopefully we'll be able to get most of this done. I think that aside from that, with respect to smuggling, counterfeiting, and all that, really is more implementation. I think of course there are a few amendments here and there to the laws, especially with respect to penalties, especially monetary penalties. Some of the provisions are so low for monetary penalties that it's really not a deterrent in any way. We think that we can do a lot with that, but more importantly, the whole issue of ensuring that we're able to police the borders. It was just last week that we held the meetings with all the agencies connected. It was last week with smuggling, yes, with the customs, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, MPA, the ports, and all that. And we're looking at how we can work with our neighbors, especially the Benin Republic, and of course our neighbors also in the north, and seeing how we can actually work with them to police the borders as much as we can. I mean, there are all sorts of places where the borders are quite wide and porous, but we think that just working with them alone, with respect to the points that we're already very familiar with, we can actually reduce the numbers. Incidentally, there was an MOU signed with the Benin Republic in 2012, or I'm not so sure it was 2012 or 2013. The MOU that was signed, I think 2013, which was meant to effectively, this was after the borders were closed. Nigeria actually closed its borders in response to the high rate of smuggling, especially of rice and poultry products and all that. So after that closure, both countries agreed to an MOU and agreed to a process of supervision of what comes in and goes out. Unfortunately, that whole thing seemed to have fallen through also, so it never quite worked. But we're thinking of resuscitating that and working with the governments on our borders to ensure that this is done, because we think that for us it really is a survival issue. We think we're completely convinced that that manufacturing sector, agricultural sectors will not be able to survive the spate of smuggling, and simply, the fact that people are able to bring in these things and dumping also is another major consideration. So we're looking very closely at these, and we've been meeting regularly. I think we're meeting again next week on this issue, just to be able to tighten some of the agreements that we've reached. But this is something that we're fully engaged on, and we hope that we'll be able to get some results very soon. Of course, you're familiar with our tomato policy as well, which is again designed to ensure that we're able to produce tomato locally, and we're completely self-sufficient in tomato production, we hope, by the end of 2018. Although, when you look at some of the, we've been speaking with quite a few investors, local and international investors. Even yesterday, we held a meeting with some who have been talking about what to do in that area. Critically, of course, is whenever you take all these sorts of preferential measures to restrict imports and all that, it means that local production must be ramped up. Otherwise, there will always be a subsidy somewhere that government is paying, especially where government is the one that's making a lot of the purchases. So we've tried And we're trying very hard to ensure that things are able to move at pace as much as possible so that we're not running too far ahead of local capacity. And we're having those discussions already with the tomato manufacturers. And of course, we also expect that this will conduce to farming, to much more activity, jobs in that sector. More of our farmers are able to get into that whole market and get, and also find themselves a decent means of livelihood. So that's by and large it. We are, again, I must thank you for the very excellent work. This is really very useful. And I hope that reading the report, one will be able to get further clarity on the issues. But I'm glad that I'm thoroughly educated now about margins of preference. I think it's very useful indeed. And I can assure you that we'll take a look at it and work with the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.